Hello, I'm Natus Lee Smith Kelly. I want to tell you about my dad. His name was Otis Smallwood Smith. He, however, his Smallwood was after his doctor, but he was called Doc most of the time. He was born in 1908 in Dickinson County, Virginia. He was one of 9 children born to Labon Smith and Nanny Maida Smith. Labon had a store in Nora, Virginia, which was a coal mining town, and it was Dad's and Uncle Dee's job, his older brother, to take the wagon and go meet the train and get supplies for the store. I don't know a whole lot about Dad's childhood in Dickinson County. He wrote about it in a little book he wrote called The Little Mountain Boy. The coal mining was getting slow there, and the lumber company was moving out of Nora. And Labon decided to buy a farm. And he bought a 200-acre farm in Russell County, which was one county over. He sent his 2 older boys and his 2 older girls on because it was springtime, and he wanted to get planting started, and so they were supposed to get the fields ready. And he had to sell the store and get his 4 wagons full of furniture and farm equipment and kids, except for grandmother Nanny, and she came on a train with Pearl. She was only about 2 years old then, so she came on the train. They had to go 26 miles to Russell County, and so it was a long trip for the wagons. But they had a nice house there and a nice farm, and they enjoyed it. All of them were excited about getting there. So the girls cooked for their brothers while they were making the trip there. He had all the farm animals, plus he got some cattle and sheep, and they were grazing on the hillsides. And he raised all kinds of crops, and they all were working really hard. They had a lot of good memories there together, working and being with each other. Daddy, when he got older, he went to Detroit. He got a job there, and he was only there for a little while, and they were laying people off, and so he got laid off, and he and his friend decided to go to Montana. Daddy had always wanted to go. So they went by being hobos on a train. When they got a job, Daddy got a job, I don't know about the boy, but Daddy got a job on a big ranch as a cowboy. And the owners really liked Dad, and Dad liked them, and they didn't have any children. And about all Dad's life, they would send a Christmas card to him. After Dad was out there for a while, maybe a year and a half, Labon wrote for him to come home because coal mines in West Virginia were hiring, and his brothers were already going to get the jobs. And so Daddy went home, and he got the job, and he wasn't there very long until he broke his leg. And so he was laid off, of course, and after it healed, he went to Williamson, West Virginia, and got a job on the railroad. He said that breaking his leg was the best thing that ever happened to him, because it got him out of the coal mines. was underground. It was not very healthy for people. All the brothers were dying from lung disease. I mean, the black lung, I think they call it. And Daddy didn't like that kind of work anyway. So, anyway, so Dad saved his money and bought him a new car and went the 200 miles from West Virginia to Virginia to see his friends and show off his car. And it was on one of those trips that he met Mom. She was on a horse at the gate starting to open it, and he drove up behind her and rushed out to the gate to open it for her. They became friends and started writing each other. And when he'd come home on weekends, he would go see her. She used to call him Darling Boy when she wrote to him. And anyway, well, they wrote letters for a while because they weren't together, you know. So they got to know each other that way. Mom was terribly jealous. Yeah. Anyway, the Great Depression happened, and Dad was laid off from the railroad. So he went home to the farm in Virginia, and his mother had died right after that with TB. She'd had it for quite a while. And he decided to marry his sweetheart, Opal. I didn't tell you her name before, but Opal Dameron. And they started housekeeping in a little cabin on the farm. Daddy's dad, Labon, died about 8 months after his wife Nanny died with cancer. And that left a lot of teenagers there in the house. Lawrence was only 13 years old, and Pearl was 16, and Naomi was 18. And Beulah was still there. She had gone, Dad had sent her to nursing school earlier, and she had been there to nurse her mother and Daddy. And they made Dad in charge of the overseer of the farm, and Lawrence would get the farm when he was 18 years old. Daddy sent him to technical school a little bit later on. Dad and Mom lived in the cabin and on the property, and in the other house, in the big house, we called it the White House. Well, when I was born, anyway. Dad liked to fox hunt, and he and Uncle Dee, they would go fox hunting, and the other men would go fox hunting at night. And they would all have their dogs, and when the dogs would start chasing the fox, they made a noise that sounded like singing. And they would all brag about their hound dogs and said theirs would sing the best. And anyway, they would have a good time chasing with their dogs, chasing the foxes. Mom didn't like the hound dogs very much at all. They would get in the chicken coops and get after the chickens and suck the eggs. And so she didn't like that very much. Dad started going to church with Mom, and he got saved about 8 or 9 months after they started going, and it wasn't long till he was out preaching, and he had been saved under the preaching of Preacher Brown. And in those days, they didn't have churches very much. Church buildings, they had the services in the home. So Daddy would go with him in the homes, and then he would start going by himself. The neighbor lady, Laura Honaker, gave him land to build a church on. and she wanted it to be non-denominational. And so he built a church, and he didn't establish it or anything, but they built a church, and it was a beautiful little country church, and we could see it from our house down the valley. It was just built for the community to worship in. They had different ones, different preachers that would come, have appointments, and come every Sunday, and that's the way it was set up. Mom, at her first pregnancy, had a rough time with the delivery. The baby was breeched baby, and they didn't think she'd make it. You know, everybody was worried about her. But she had a little baby girl, and named her Mildred Joanne. A year and a half later, I was born, and they named me Nada Lee. Somebody told me that Daddy was threshing wheat and was so busy that he didn't even come in to see me. I think he wanted a boy instead of a girl. But a year and a half later, he got his boy, and he named him David Larry. Most people called him Bud or Buddy. And Bud and I called Joanne Janny. And I guess we're the only ones that called her that. After the Depression, Dad went back to his job on the railroad. So our family moved to Williamson, West Virginia. We children started to school there. We lived on Peter Street, where the houses were built on each side of the big hills. But no roads on the hills, just a lot of concrete steps. They were big and wide, I remember. But when I went back and visited Williamson, they weren't that wide. I always wondered how they got furniture up all those steps. We learned to roller skate on the sidewalks. World War II had started. I remember the blackouts that we had. When the whistle blew, I was always scared. We had black window shades to pull down, and we were in complete darkness until the whistle blew again. We had food rationing stamps. Remember drinking evaporated milk. Dad decided to move us to Road Fork, Kentucky. It was more in the country, and we got us a milk cow. The mountains in Kentucky were just as high as West Virginia, but we had a little more room. He got his cow in a barn. We had a well in the backyard. We had a bucket on a rope that we threw down to get water and then pull it up. We were back using the outdoor toilets. This was the coldest house we ever lived in. We only had a fireplace and a cook stove for heat. We moved down the road to a bigger house. It also had a bigger yard to mow. When we were in Road Fork, we went to a 2-room schoolhouse. And they had first, second, and third grade in one room. Bud was probably in the third grade. The other room had fourth, fifth, and sixth in it. I was in the fourth grade. She would read the Bible and pray. We would sing folk songs, and she'd play the piano and hymns sometime. And we did all this while we were getting warm. After Bud built a fire. We had a good time there at that school. We had pie socials. I don't know if you know what a pie social is or not, but that's when they would auction off pies, and everybody take a pie, and all the boys would we had them in boxes all decorated up, and they didn't know whose pie they were buying, but they would bid for the pie. And sometimes they'd get a pretty girl, and sometimes they wouldn't. But they had to eat the pie with the girls. And anyway, Mom got a new washing machine while we were at Road Fork, and it had a little tub on the side to spin the water out of the clothes. That was just really something new, and we just were excited about it. You could only put just a few clothes in that little tub, and you had a time, you know. She and Dad were crying. I thought it was because Mom didn't like the washing machine. It was because Roosevelt had died. Everybody loved Roosevelt. My mom and the school teacher were good friends. We lived right beside her. And every time I'd get in trouble, Mom was always a homeroom parent. She would come in about that time, and I wouldn't get a spanking. I don't know why. I guess they didn't want to spank me in front of her. And so Mom, that was an opportune time for me, because I had gotten in trouble in the 3rd grade, and she did that. Mom always volunteered, even after we were out of school, to help in the PTA or help in the schools some way. Dad could walk right across the bridge to his work, and that made it easier for him. He had his hound dogs at Road Fork, and he had a little truck that we went to Virginia in, and he'd take those hound dogs in the back, and we had, you know, I don't know what you call it, but it was built up on the back slats or something, and to make it higher. And those hound dogs would throw up, and we would throw up. I don't know. But Mom would be up in the front crying because we were back there with those hound dogs. Dad was having revivals in towns nearby so he could get back to work by 11 p.m. He would work until 7 a.m. Dad never did like to sleep very long, and when he'd get up, he'd always be fixing something or building something. We would get to ride on the trains free. We had good memories of our train rides. NW stood for the routes that they had. East was Norfolk and Virginia, and west was Cincinnati, Ohio. We went to the zoo there, and I don't know if it's the same year, but we went to Norfolk to the beach, and we had a really good time. Beautiful ocean, and I was swimming, and I swam way out in the water, and Dad'd have to come get me. I kept swimming out, and he said, "Don't go over this line." And I said, "Dad, I'm going to fight the Germans." And so he got a big kick out of that. Anyway. But Dad decided he was going to buy Mom's home place, and he remodeled it and put 2 rooms on the house, and he got 2 big picture windows from the railroad. They were tearing something down, and he brought them all the way from West Virginia to Virginia. I don't know how in the world he kept from breaking them, but they were beautiful, and he put one in each corner, and we had all kinds of light, and Mom made a flower garden in the back there. Dad would we were there, sometimes would stay all summer, Mom and us, and Dad would come home on weekends. We always called the holler, as we called it, home, because it seemed more like home to us, and because we were there. Russell County, Virginia, down in the southwestern corner of Virginia, down in the poor Appalachian Mountains. Richmond didn't send much money down that way. But Dad would dam up the creek. We'd go swimming, and we'd have a really good time, and Dad would stay under the water longer than anybody. And we'd get worried about him. As kids, we'd get real worried about him, and then he'd pop up, and he was all right. He would peddle his vegetables to the coal mining towns nearby, and sometimes he'd let me go with him, and that was a big treat for me. So Dad decided we were getting junior high and high school age, and we decided that we'd move back to Virginia permanently to the farm, and he would come home on weekends. And he had built up enough seniority that he got off more than just the weekends, and he was there a lot. But we went to school there in Virginia, and so they only had 11 grades. So they put me back from the 7th grade that I was in, and I had to repeat the 7th grade in a 2-room schoolhouse again. The teacher later on, after I'd gotten to high school, my cousins told me about this, that the teacher had the students put wood under the schoolhouse, take all the books to the outdoor toilet, and they didn't understand why, they didn't even question it, but they said after they got on the bus that they looked back and saw that the school was on fire. And so it burned down, and several other 2-room schools burned down that same year. They were trying to get a consolidated elementary school. Yeah, it did burn down, and so they got a nice brick school for everybody, And then that same year, the high school burned down. I don't know if it was said or what happened. But when I went to the 8th grade, they had shacks put up for us. And they had little knotholes in the walls. And my little boyfriends would pass notes to me through the knotholes. And one of them would say, "Open this at 9 o'clock," or something like that. We didn't have phones, so we couldn't communicate. But anyway, I don't know why I started talking about myself, but Daddy had beehives, and he would rob the bees, and we would have lots of good honey. And Dad ate honey all of his life, just about every day. He said that it was healthy for you, and he was healthy right up until he got cancer, and but he didn't even take an aspirin or anything. But he worked hard on the farm, and when he came home, and he'd plow the fields and get them ready for crops, and he would. Mom would work right along with him, and she liked doing outside work as much as anybody, because she'd always done that. And Bud liked to work too on the farm, and they raised tobacco and corn, and we put up hay, and I'd get to go and get on the horse and pull the hay up to the stacks, and that was really fun for me. And also, I'd get to ride the horse. I got to ride the horse home one time from up on the hill where Dad had planted corn, and Bud and I'd been hoeing all day. And he asked me if I wanted to ride the horse. And I got on it without a saddle or anything, and I just put my arms around it, and he hit it with a big switch. And so I went down through the woods on that horse, and I was crying, "Mama, Mama, Mama, Mama." And got down to the end, and I fell off the horse in the creek. I wasn't hurt or anything, but I was scared to death. He got a real bad whipping for all that, too. Mom tried to teach me to milk a cow, and it was too late to make a farm girl out of me because I was 13 years old. And so I made the old cow sick, and she threw up. I think I pulled the wrong faucets or something. I don't know. Anyway, I tried to get out of farm work as much as I could. Me and Janny stayed in the house and did a lot of the work inside, cleaning the house and washing dishes and everything else. And I brought the water from the spring. We had 2 barrels there to wash our hair and take a bath. We carried our little washpan up to our room and took a bath in our rooms. Dad had made all kinds of shelves in that house, and he fixed up the attic really pretty for Bud. I painted the rafters, and really the original living room was the most beautiful, and they had fixed it up real pretty. And so we had a good, Daddy made a road down there because the road was always muddy, and still that road was muddy, but Daddy had made another road because the other one was washed out. I think he might have had somebody help him, but he would drive his truck or car, whatever he had, into the hollow, and he would say, he said he would get started to go down the hill, and he'd say, I'm just going to push on the gas and get it going. And he'd go real fast and get it. And that's the way he was with his driving around the mountains. He'd see a car coming, and he was trying to pass somebody, and he'd look at that car, and he says, "I think I can make it around him." And we always were holding on for dear life, But, Bud had, my boyfriends, or our boyfriends, didn't have enough sense to know to leave their car out on the road. It was a half-mile walk into Muddy Holler, and they'd bring their cars in, and then Bud would have to get up in the middle of the night, and not in the middle of the night, but at night. We had a grandfather clock, so Daddy always knew when we got home. We had to care for. But anyway, he'd have to get I don't know. Anyway, get the horse and go pull a lot of people out, and we had a lot of good memories there. Mom would make Dad lemon pies before he came on weekends, and she liked to make yeast rolls, and Jenny'd have the house shining and Bud clean, and Bud would have all his chores done. we went to high school and graduated. Mom moved back to Williamson to be with Dad, and we went to college, and Mom told us one Christmas when we were home that she found out that she had cancer, colon cancer, and they were going to operate on her and do a colostomy. And so Daddy said we were just getting ready to live. I remember him saying that. But she lived 3 more years. We all got married, and Mom made my wedding dress. It was beautiful. And Daddy cried through mine and Jenny's weddings. We got married at Honeacres Chapel, both of us, and but Bud got married 6 months after Joe and I were married. Mom got to see some of her grandchildren before she died. She saw Janny's 3, Pamela and Karen and David. And she saw my Joey. And she saw Bud's Laura Jean. She was a baby when Mom died. And Mom, her cancer was back, and it had spread all over and in her intestines, and she couldn't eat or anything. And she was in a lot of pain for a long time because they didn't have a lot of good pain medicine then, and she would take a BC powder the BC powder was just for a headache, but when she'd get in pain. I lived in California then, and they sent a telegram and told me that she was dying to come home. I got to Cincinnati, and she died in the wintertime, and there was snow on the ground, and the plane was canceled. The trip was canceled to Huntington, Virginia, West Virginia, and so they put me up in a hotel in Cincinnati, Ohio. I went back up to the airport the next day, and it was still canceled. And so I was standing in line, and I started crying. And this fella, he said, "What's wrong?" And I told him, and he said, "I think we can still make the train." Said, "We'll have to go across on the ferry." He said, "I'm going to Williamson too." And so we rushed, and he helped me get a cab, and we got down to the ferry and went across. And the train was just pulling out when we got there. He pushed my suitcase on and me on. He didn't get on. I don't even know his name. Didn't even think to ask, I guess. But I felt like it was my guardian angel helping me get to where Mom was. Mom, when she was dying, before she died, she had Bud take the oxygen off. She'd had it on for many months, and sat straight up in bed and sang "All power, hail the power to Jesus' name." She laid back down, and she said, "Oh, honey, how beautiful." She had a vision of heaven. She said, "The flowers are so beautiful, I wish you could see them." And she lay down and just went to sleep, died. And so we all grieved, and Daddy was lost without her. The summer after Mom died, Dad came to California to see us. He got to see our new baby, Wade. He also got to see our new house. He knocked on the walls and he said, "How much do you think how much did you pay for this anyway?" And he thought the walls were really thin. He didn't realize that in California, you don't have to build those strong houses because of the weather. And you don't have to have the walls that thick. And so he went back to see Janny in Texas after his visit with us. He built another church in Toller, Kentucky, called Toller Free Will Baptist Church. There he met Thelma Varner. She was there visiting her parents. She worked in Ohio. And they were members of Dad's church. And so she had never been married. She was a little bit younger than Dad. She was a good Christian lady, and so they started writing to each other. And a few months after, they decided to get married. Dad took her on a long honeymoon. He took her to Kansas, Wichita, I think it was, and he was in a 2-week revival. He also stopped by to see some relatives there. He came on to visit us in California. He then took her to Old Mexico and back to see Janny, who was living in Texas then. So Thelma said that was a long trip, and she said she'd only been to 3 states before that. They had 4 kids, Denise, Renee, and Otis Lee, and Vanessa. He got him another boy. Daddy built them a new house. Thelma worked right along with him, beside him. She liked to help him too, and he did everything, including the plumbing on it. And I said, "Dad, you don't know how to do plumbing." And he said, "Honey, all you have to do is get you a Sears Roebuck catalog, and says it shows you right there, pictures how you do it." He says it's not hard at all to do. And so that's Dad for you, because he just knew how to build. And so anyway, he retired after 40 years on the railroad. And they moved to Bristol, Virginia, which is near his home place. And he started another church, built another church, and established it, called Jackson Memorial. He was there quite a while as pastor then. He could take on the bit of pastor. When we visited them, we had such a good time. Thelma would greet us with open arms. She would fix us delicious meals and wait on us, and we would all gather around the piano and sing, and the family was so talented. I liked to hear Dad sing Zion's Hill. His voice was good even as he got older. Dad was a good storyteller. He would tell his tales and embellish them as he went along. He had all of us laughing the entire time. When Daddy was pastor of the church there at Jackson Memorial, Denise had bought him a Donald Duck hat brought it from Disney World. And he waited till church was over, and he was shaking hands with everybody before they went out the door. And he had that Donald Duck hat on, and everybody was dying and laughing at him as as he shook hands with everybody. And it just showed how his sense of humor. And Denise was telling me about it. Dad was a loving father, kind and gentle. He never met a stranger. He called everyone honey. He loved the Lord with all his heart. He humbly knelt to pray. He died with cancer when he was 84 years old. My sweet daddy, I loved him so much. Here's a poem that I thought was appropriate. It's called Safely Home. I am home in heaven, dear ones, oh so happy and so bright. There is perfect joy and beauty in this everlasting life. All the pain and grief is over, every restless tossing past. I am now at peace forever, safely home in heaven at last.